It's time for Lennart Meri lecture. It means that the conference comes to an end and at least some of us go back to everyday life. What everyday life actually means, I don't know. But in any case, it's far more complicated than surroundings here in Tallinn Radisson Conference Hall. The planes are flying, not only passenger ones. The observers have been abducted. It seems that the transatlantic phone lines don't work. There are water cuts and so on. And the red lines, well, who knows where they are today. Juridically, according to agreements, it might be okay, but you cannot find the red lines drawn on the landscape or through the forest or on the fields. The red lines are most of mental ones, determined culturally, morally, and it's not very easy to understand where they are just now when the phone lines are broken. Not here, right, but out of doors in everyday life, perhaps yes. But well, the lecture. I'm glad to introduce you today's speaker. He's a grand old man of Finnish Foreign Service. He served there since 1961 to 1983. Between 1977 and 1983, he was ambassador of Finland to the United States. After that, he served as the general manager and member of the board of the Union Bank of Finland. Between 1990 and 2000, he was a manager director of perhaps the most prominent Finnish think tank, EVA, the Finnish Business and Policy Forum. Since 2000, he has been senior advisor to President Martti Ahtisaari. He's a columnist for the Suomen Kuvalehti and has published 3 books about Finnish politics. Some 6 weeks ago, the Financial Times published his response to Kissinger's and Brzezinski's thoughts that for Ukraine, the best model might be the Finnish experience dealing with Russia. His response was clear. They have, I'm afraid, been too hopeful. The Finnish experience is very difficult to copy. The Finnish political culture can only be understood if we are mindful of the fact that for 7 centuries Finland was an integral part of Sweden. So, what it could mean to us? Very clear, I think. Planning the future, you should never forget the history, and vice versa. You should never get stuck in the past. The best future planning is somewhere between there. And also those red lines go always between the past and the future through our minds. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jaakko Iloniemi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just been in the 21st century. I'm going to take you back a century or so. It is needless to say that it is a very great honor to be invited to hold this lecture. As we commemorate Lennart Meri, we do so in honoring a great statesman of our era. I had the privilege to know personally President Meri. I would be bragging if I were to say that we were great friends. I had, however, more than once an opportunity to exchange opinions and views, and he made a very strong impression on me. Here is a man, I thought, that the independent Estonian nation needs. He will be well received all over the world as a strong representative of the Estonian nation and indeed of European thinking. Estonia has been lucky in having a person like this as their first president after regaining their independence. Today the world, and in particular the European scene, looks very different from what it was during the last years of President Meri's life. Once again, the drums of war are heard. Once again, acrimonious words are exchanged, and guns are fired in anger, and there is much unrest. Why? That's a legitimate question. We are told that all justices and grievances are being redressed today. Borders that have been arbitrary and unjust are being redrawn. That may sound convincing, but what would a European map look like if one European nation after the other would raise a battle cry insisting that they too demand their justice, that they too have suffered from injustices? I know many nations, our own included, which would have a good case. European nations have, however, in absence of an all-embracing peace treaty, committed themselves to respect the borders that were drawn in the aftermath of the Second World War and even in the aftermath of the Cold War. They did so on the highest political level in Helsinki in the year of 1975 and repeated that afterwards. Then it was agreed that inviolability of borders is one of the guiding principles governing relations among nations in Europe. No country, not a single one, has so far challenged the validity of this principle. As I was myself one of those who participated in the negotiations leading to the Helsinki summit in 1975, I remember very well how some delegations stressed the various points in that final act. For the Germans, the all-important issue was the principle of peaceful change of borders. That, of course, was about the hope for reunification of Germany. For Austrians, Finns, the Swedes and the Swiss, it was about the right to be or not to be in an alliance or to remain neutral. For the delegation representing Moscow, the all-important principle was the inviolability of borders. That was the case in 1975. How about today? The present world order is unsatisfactory. That we have learned from the head of the Russian Federation. It is a unipolar order and therefore unstable, he declares. That is an invitation to open negotiations for a new world order. But what kind of an order? Which are the principles that would guide the nations in the future? Here very little has been said. One of the ideas launched already years ago is called by Russians as Helsinki Plus. What that is, what should be added to the 1975 Final Act is not very clear to me. Until that becomes clear, how about living up to the original Helsinki Final Act? That would be a good beginning, I think. What we have heard so far of the new order, it sounds rather familiar. It sounds like the Yalta Order or European division into spheres of interest and influence. We have seen in recent months and weeks that the state, determined to use force, can achieve its objectives by acting unexpectedly and in a defiant manner. The Americans have been, and indeed are, preoccupied by their domestic agenda, dedicating very little attention to Europe, which after all has been rather calm since the Georgian War of 2008. The members of the European Union again have been struggling with their economic worries, and the politicians have dedicated most of their time to their domestic or common issues. They have not been prepared to meet a challenge of a military nature in the middle of Europe. The strike came out of the blue, and it succeeded. Initial success is, however, no guarantee of final victory. It is good to draw lessons from history. In 1941, as Japan surprised the Americans by launching a successful attack on Pearl Harbor, the initial success was great. Most of the American Pacific Fleet was destroyed in hours. The declaration of war came the day after. A Japanese admiral in charge, Isoroku Yamamoto, had second thoughts. He had seen much of the world. He had visited the United States Naval College, and he was no nationalist. He did understand the risks involved in the Pearl Harbor operation, but being an officer in active duty, he did what he was expected to do in his capacity. We may have awoken a sleeping giant, he said, after seeing the destruction. And indeed, a giant had been sleeping. It took some time before the giant had collected himself and was ready to strike. But strike back it did, with formidable force. We have learned already in 2007 from a speech made by President Putin at the Munich Security Conference that, in his view, Russia has been ignored. Its legitimate interests have not been respected, and it has been seen as irrelevant. Much of that is true. In the years after the collapse of communism, Russia was indeed ignored as a world power. The simple reason is that it was no longer a world power. It was in dire need of external assistance, and assistance was given to it. It is true, of course, that those days are past now. As Russia today is insisting on being treated with respect, it is a good thing to ask how respect is earned in international relations. Yes, earned. Let me give you some European examples. Sweden is respected because it has many great achievements. Achievements that serve national purposes as well as larger ones. A balanced, wealthy country with full respect to the rule of law and social policies with social justice. That is respect earned. Switzerland is another country we respect. Harmonious relations between 4 different ethnic and cultural entities, much prosperity, a well-working democracy. Or how about the country that hosts our conference? In spite of decades of subjugation to a foreign power and a foreign system, it has made a splendid return to the ranks of well-governed, democratic, and even in economic terms, a growing nation. That again is respect earned. Respect comes from achievements. Russia too has many shining achievements with all respect, in science, in the arts, in music. Many of these are world-class achievements. As far as those aspects are concerned, Russia has and deserves our respect. But in my 3 other examples, Sweden, Switzerland, and Estonia, there are a couple of more characteristics. All 3 are well-established democracies. All 3 are countries where rule of law prevails. Their governments are virtually free of corruption. That is something, together with the other achievements, that gives these countries the respect they so well deserve. As soon as Russia meets these standards, I'm sure it will also have the respect it so desires. Sometimes it seems to me that at least some Russians do not always see the difference between respect and awe, or indeed fear. If that is the case, then intimidation is used as a vehicle to impress others. One form of intimidation are major military maneuvers. Sometimes such maneuvers even have names that they in themselves are part of the message. In recent years, we have seen maneuvers called Vostok and Zapad, East or West, so that there will be no confusion about the message conveyed. Such maneuvers are often staged so that they simulate the occupation of the territory of a neighboring state, or the destruction of the capital of a neighboring state. Such a case was the case 3 years ago, as Warsaw was blown up off the map with a nuclear attack. To simulate the annihilation of a capital of a neighboring country is a monumental thing to do in order to intimidate. No wonder that such messages make people and nations think twice about their security. They have even more reason to worry as they live in countries which have in recent years reduced their defensive capabilities. That they have done in the innocent belief that a time of military intimidation is part of the past, sinister past. Most European countries and North Americans alike have reduced considerably their conventional forces in Europe. Some have been doing so up to these very days. Now today alarm bells are sounding all over in the parliaments. Have we been too trusting, too innocent? Have we misread the signs of change? That is a proper question to ask. What is wrong with the way how we have seen European developments, and more precisely the Russian developments? As we are trying to understand where the root cause of these misunderstandings is, let me cite something that I find helpful. This is a quote. "The most common method of misunderstanding foreigners is to assume that they are similar to you," says Robert Cooper in his valuable but unconventional book, The Breaking of Nations. Robert Cooper was a top diplomat with the European Commission before his retirement. His point is well worth examining a little closer even. By assuming that foreigners are just like we are guilty of the fallacy of thinking that we represent the norm, some sort of a standard by which the world is to be seen. Our world and our worldview, that is perhaps some arrogance if we so assume. Values is the word that we have often spoken here. Values and principles based on those values. As I was a young member of the Finnish delegation to the United Nations, I got a lesson about principles. A more experienced colleague from a country that I shall not name now voted in a manner which contradicted the way his delegation had voted before. During the coffee break, I said to him, in my innocence, "Do you vote on the basis of some principles here, or was that a vote of a political convenience?" And my more experienced friend said, "My dear friend, our policy is always based on principles. But the world is a complicated world. It cannot guide it with one principle only. That's why we have a set of principles. You never know which one you need." Well, that was a good lesson. We have heard some Latin here, and I'll continue for a little while. Pacta sunt servanda. In other words, agreements are to be honored. That was a Roman principle, often quoted in discussions of this nature. In 1994, the Ukrainians had on their soil nuclear weapons left over from the Soviet times. They were given assurances that if they give up their weapons, their frontiers would be protected. They believed in the signatures of the presidents of the United States and Russia and the Prime Minister of Britain and gave up their weapons. Assurances. Well, we haven't heard much of them later. It seems to me that those who gave those assurances preferred to look elsewhere when the time came. If commitments like that are not honored, what about the commitments we have in other agreements or treaties or memoranda? How credible are they if in such a matter of life and death as nuclear weapons they are not honored? Well, we tend to compare the best of our intentions against the worst practices of our adversaries. That is not unusual in international affairs. Principles and values guide us as long as they are in harmony with our interests. The question really is, do we bend our principles or do we redefine our interests? That's the choice we have to make from time to time. The fact is that different political cultures mold different patterns of thinking. The Russian political culture is very different from most of Western Europe. Of course it is different, because Russian history is so different, the political history in particular. So let us not expect that the Russians see the world the way we do. If we are going to really be able to communicate with them, we have an uphill task to understand them better. Their task is no less difficult. It is even more difficult because they live, compared to us, in a political isolation. It was Marquis de Custine who, in his book Russia in 1839, coined the phrase, "I don't blame Russians for what they are. I blame them for what they pretend to be." What went wrong and why? What is it that we did not quite understand? Well, there may be a host of things. One of them, I think, is that we believe that mutual interdependence was the ultimate guarantee of a good East-West relationship. Russia had what was needed in Western Europe, oil and gas, and Western Europeans had the means to pay for those. Russia again was in need, and indeed is in need, of investment goods and consumer goods. The Western European economies have the means to satisfy all those needs. This should constitute a perfect platform for a good relation, an economic relation, a political relationship, even a security relationship. We have believed that that has been our common understanding, East and West. For reasons beyond my understanding, even this link has now been questioned. Europeans are today doing their very best to find alternative sources to these fuels. This can hardly be in the Russian interest. Without substantial Western participation, it is very hard to modernize the Russian economy and improve the living standards in that country. Well, what is said here is no excuse for breaches against good conduct or the existing and recognized forms of international conduct. In spite of the cultural profound differences, the Russian leadership is well versed in the basic principles of international conduct. They have great diplomats and a solid body of experience in the conduct of international affairs. They have, however, chosen not to play by the rules they themselves have recognized. It is an entirely different case with the common man, the average Russian. He cannot be expected to know what has happened in the course of the last few weeks because he has been informed in a seriously misleading way. Nationalistic fervor is easily instigated if sentiments of hurt pride and dignity are seen to be at issue. We all know what has happened, but we do not know, not yet at least, what is to be expected. If the pronouncements we have heard are any guide, then more of the same is to be expected. Therefore, it is only natural that people think themselves, how can we put an end to this dangerous situation? How can we limit the damage? There is one school of thought found in many corners of Europe and also in North America. What they say is, Ukraine is, after all, historically part of Russia. So it has been for several centuries. Ukrainians are not one nation, but two or three nations, since the Tatars of the Crimea cannot be excluded. It is not such a big thing if Ukraine is reunited with Russia. After all, earlier it was even called Russia Minor. So let us not endanger friendly relations with Russia, because this is not such a big thing. Some put it in the same way as Secretary Baker did with the Balkan Wars. We have no dog in this fight. True, we have no dog in this fight. But we have much more than a dog. We have seen a return of the philosophy that might is right. What is mine, what is yours is negotiable. There is no basis for the conduct of international affairs. If the culture of a cloak and dagger is back, then our peril is near. It is no consolation if the color of the cloak is green and the dagger is well concealed. In ancient times, the dagger was most likely forged in Toledo. Today, Tula is more likely. It is no good that we lament the evil turn of the European interstate relations without thinking about the remedy. The remedy is to show that ill-gotten is soon lost. Crimea is not necessarily the main thing here. It is considered by most observers already lost, but it has a price. The international economic community is already exacting that price. Capital flight from Russia is a strong signal. Even without any sanctions, the markets have spoken loud and clear. It will take quite some time before investor confidence will return. Both domestic and foreign investors are likely to hold back for a long time. Sanctions are always troublesome because they hurt both parties, but market reactions can be even more powerful than the sanctions. By choosing to challenge the existing order and international law, Russia has inflicted itself a wound. In a country where the economy has already for some time been in doldrums, that means that the living standards are more likely to sink rather than raise. Threat issued about withdrawal from some existing arms reduction agreements to improve the situation is not very promising. One of the few German words that has found its place in English usage is Weltanschauung, the way we see the world. It is obvious that there is no one common world view for the time being. Much could be achieved if there would be a better understanding of what the worldview of others is and where the origins of such view are. History is no cookbook with recipes for how to come to grips with the problems we meet. But unless we know our history, we have no hope of understanding one another. Present thinking everywhere owes so much to past thinking, past ideas, and even values. It is customary to stress and emphasize that the world changes rapidly. That is true, of course. But we cannot delete what we have learned from our parents and grandparents. We cannot reset our minds with entirely new concepts of right and wrong, just and unjust. Russia is a neighbor with all of Europe. It is even more a neighbor with countries like Estonia and Finland. Both countries have many historical, cultural, and economic points of contact with Russia. A prosperous Russia is in our best interest. A law-abiding Russia would be a safe neighbor. Now we see in Russia trends that are not good and not healthy for either them nor us. The outside world cannot, and it must not, interfere with domestic Russian political processes. It is for the Russians to sort out what they have done now, and it is for their leadership to do what is in their own best interest. In my youth, there was customary to finish a speech with a quote from a famous source. This was done in order to give some luster to an otherwise mundane speech. I will try as well. The following quote is from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the year was 1933. This is a quote. "History has shown that dictatorships do not grow out of strong and successful governments, but out of weak and helpless ones. If by democratic methods people can get a government strong enough to protect them from fear and starvation, their democracy succeeds. But if they do not, they grow impatient. Therefore, the only sure bulwark of continuing liberty is government strong enough to protect the interests of the people, and people strong enough and well enough informed to maintain a strong control over the government." End of quote. There are countries and political cultures where the citizens are underlings of the government. And there are countries where the citizens are the principals and the government a vehicle to fulfill the task given to it by the principals, the citizens. The choice is ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Iloniemi, for a deeply inspiring set of remarks. Thank you, Pauli, for selecting the ambassador. What an excellent choice that brings everything together, all of what we've been talking about in a powerful intellectual way. And thank you, Mr. Meri, for so graciously introducing Ambassador Iloniemi. For those of you who didn't hear an introduction or don't know Mr. Meri, this is Lennart Meri's son and a member of parliament here. But right now I'd like to turn to, to President Ilves for a very special moment, for a special presentation, please.
Thank you, Matt. After that stunning lecture, what can I say? So I'll talk about something altogether different. There is another German word that needs to be spread around in addition to Weltanschauung. It's also Vergangenheitsbewältigung. And I think Vergangenheitsbewältigung is something that of which there is too little in the world. That is, if you don't know German, that's dealing with the past. Reckoning with the past. Now, when it comes to reckoning the past, it's usually about dealing with all the bad things that were done in the past in your country, and that's. But when it comes to recognizing the good things that have been done to or with or in your country, then we are, especially in Estonia, sorely lacking. That's why I every year give out a small number of medals in the name of Estonia to people who have generally done something spectacular for us. And today I'd like to make up for something I couldn't do, which I traditionally do on Independence Day, which is when I give people these awards, because he couldn't come at the time, and we always do it in front of an august body of people. But since there's another august body of people here, I thought I'd do it today, since he's also here today. And I'd like to talk about a person who's done a huge amount in many ways. His name is Bob Nurek. He, along with with Steve Larrabee and the late Ron Asmus, were one of the primary drivers of the entire discussion of enlarging or expanding, probably expanding NATO in the 1990s, at a time in which that was not a very popular idea, not even to Poland, not to mention the Baltic countries. And Bob Nurek was one of the few courageous persons who actually took up the banner and started providing the intellectual meat for the expansion of NATO whole and free. Bob is, in addition to all of those things, and has been for the past 25 years, 23 years, one of the few people, I would argue, in the United States who actually understands this area. I mean, he's made it a thing to understand us. Not always properly, because I remember a number of fights I've had with him. But in general, he has that unique ability of espoused by John Maynard Keynes, that when I learn new facts, I change my mind. He does that, I don't. And basically, in addition to all those reasons, the fact that he's just such a nice guy and helpful, who does things above and beyond the call of duty. So when the new ambassador came to Estonia several years ago, no one could go meet him because there was yet again one of those debilitating blizzards that come out of nowhere, and Washington only has 2 snowplows, so there was no way of picking him up from the airport, and Bob went personally and got the ambassador. So for all those reasons, I'd like Bob to come here, and I will award you the Cross of Terra Mariana, which is the highest order we give to people who have done great services to the Republic of Estonia. So Bob, please come here.
I hadn't expected this to happen in public, so I hadn't prepared any remarks, but if I could, I'd like to say 2 things very quickly. First, I'm, of course, very, very honored and flattered by this. But I know very well that what's happened here has been the work of the people here, here in Estonia and here in the Baltics. That gets me to the second point, which is, for me, I was one of these people who came here in 1992, and I've seen the changes. And seeing the changes here in the Baltics in general has been enormously rewarding. For me, that's been the reward. And I view this as a symbol of that reward that I've already received. Thank you very much.
If you look carefully at the bottom of your agenda, you'll see in very small type, final words. That's me. And I'm conscious that the only other small words on the agenda are lunch. So I won't keep you from that for very long. Those who don't know me, I introduce myself as Gary Johnson. I'm the chairman of the International Advisory Board to the Institute and have been since it was set up, and it's a great privilege to be involved with people who know this region and this country well in assisting Matt and his team to put this conference together and to do other things. I am will take the opportunity of the man with the mic to say something else. I'm also somebody who was fortunate to come to this country at the time about that Bob Nurek and others that were mentioned first came. I was then Commander-in-Chief for NATO in Northern Europe and watched with admiration the way that Lennart Meri led his country out of the Soviet cage into the open spaces of free Europe and others like him. It was a most inspiring time. And my comment at the stage was, look, the bear is wounded and it's crawling away a bit, but it hasn't gone away, so let's lock the cage. And I was told by my wiser colleagues and those in the diplomatic service and elsewhere that I was just a Cold War warrior, that the bear would be tamed, it would have its claws clipped, it would dance to our tune, and if that didn't work, it'd probably go away and die. None of those things has really happened. It doesn't like our tune. It's gone away, recovered its strength, it's found the key to the cage, and it's stuck a paw out, and it's mauled the nearest face. And we meet here, and have met here, at a time of, I think, sea change in attitudes. It's been apparent throughout this conference, the consensus that this is a momentous time, probably the greatest since the wall came down, and Yeltsin stood on his tank outside the Duma, and we knew that it was over up the way. Now it's beginning again, or is it? I won't sum up the conference. I just want to make two short points that were touched upon. It's the importance first of the NATO conference in Wales. It was the failure of NATO at the Bucharest comment which gave the signal that Putin could start his long-planned operations, which he then did. And I was in Tbilisi shortly after it happened. And a Georgian minister who I met straight off the plane from Moscow, normally very happy, very ebullient person, was grey and ashen. And I said, what's the problem? He said, before I got on the plane, I talked to a very senior Russian. He did mention the name, but I won't. And he said, he poked me in the chest and said, you see, your friends have abandoned you. Now we will do with you what we will. And so they did in 2008. Then there was a pause, if you mark the progress, while the Russians digested the lessons from that, set about improving their military, tamped down Abkhazia and South Ossetia, calmed us down, got through the Sochi Olympics. And the timing of the next Crimea adventure is probably not what they would have wished, but they had the plans for it, so they went ahead. Now we come to Cardiff. What is NATO going to do about the issue of enlargement this time? There will be those who say, go for it. This is the time when you must stand up and not desert your friends. And some will say to that, think of the risks, think of the conflagration, think of the pain that we must bear if we do it. There will be others who say, no, don't do a thing. And the dilemma is great. I wouldn't like to be taking those decisions. But the outcome of those decisions will determine where this business goes next, in one way or another. If there is no decisive movement, if there is only fudge and funk and fine words, watch out Moldova, watch out Georgia, and it's no coincidence that that wise man, Francois Heisberg, took time off from this conference to go and walk around the streets of Narva. One related point, if I may, on enlargement, it's been such not a surprise, but such a pleasure to see the debate about NATO membership for Sweden and Finland coming out in the open and being discussed very openly. How can I possibly dabble in the affairs of an independent country? I can offer a two-word piece of advice, and it's the slogan that is used in my country for those who seek to persuade the Scots at the referendum in September not to go for independence, but to maintain the United Kingdom. And that slogan is, better together. Think about it. Now I have to just finish, and then I really will. It's like a karaoke session, this, isn't it? Can't take the mic away from him. Then I will go away. I think it's been a cracking good conference. They get better all the time. What a joy to do it in a place like this. What a joy to have on stage a minister and a president who will quote readily from ancient Greeks and Thucydides. What a pleasure to have a president who will quote from ancient Romans in Latin. and then do us the compliment of assuming that we understood him. Thank you, Mr. President, for furthering our education. Our thanks are due, of course, the President's leadership for this conference. Our thanks are due to Matt Breiser for everything he does in the Institute and for leading this, for encouraging people to come. Our thanks are due to Lauri Jörvenpää for him and his team in delivering the thing. And in particular, let's not forget Piret Sulga and all the ladies who help out at that administration part out there, many of whom are volunteers. They all deserve our thanks. Thank you. And if I could just step back on the home team for a minute, thank you all for coming. Have a safe journey home. Spread the word that this is 3 days worth spending, and come again next year. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sir Gary, and talk about what a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to have you as the chairman of our International Advisory Board for the wisdom, the guidance, the insights you give us. But before we wrap it all up, I want to remind the volunteers, whom I thank also as deeply as possible, that there's a wonderful tradition whereby at the end of the conference, there's a photo taken with President Ilves. So stick around. I guess we'll do it right here, Mr. President. And I really, really want to emphasize my thanks to Ambassador Jörvenpää, who this is his vision, this conference. It was his effort. He's the one who thought through all the panels, did the impossible balancing act, which Kadri used to do, which Rina did last year. Thank you, Kadri. And thank you for your advice also as we were finally pulling the last parts of this together. But Pauli, this is your event. It's your triumph. I've never been to a conference quite like this, and it's infused with your spirit, including your propensity to kind of melt into the shadows and be humble. But you should be as proud as can be, because we all are. So thank you so much, Pauli. Thank you. Thank you. And as Sir Gary said, yes, thanks to Pauli's core team, Piret Sulger, as well as Eb Palma, and then we had a couple of others as well. Oh yeah, Piret Ehevald. And then this year I think we had much more effective streaming and Twitter. And so I'd like to thank both Emmett Tui and Anna Balak on our staff. Emmett, one of the brightest researchers and analysts you'll ever meet. Our media coordinator, Maris Helrand. And then one more time I'd like to thank our sponsors, if that's okay. I'd like to thank Ellering, which, by the way, as I was saying in our energy discussion yesterday, playing a critical role for all of the EU in connecting Estonia and Finland with the only energy connection of the Baltic states to date with the European Union. So thanks to Ellering, thanks to Eesti Energia for keeping the lights on using shale oil, or however you do it. Thank you. I'd like to thank a Finnish foundation, the Jenni ja Antti Vihurin Foundation, and to Mr. Simo Palokangas in particular. Thanks again to the Estonian Center for Eastern Partnership, not only for sponsoring this event with us, but also for being our partner throughout the year in so many other events. And thank you to Lennart Meri, Tallinn Airport. And finally, well, I'd of course like to thank the staff of this hotel as well. Radisson Blu Hotel is always a great venue. Everything works so smoothly, the food's delicious, and this year it's actually extra beautiful with the remodeling. So thank you for your partnership, Radisson Blu. And the last remark, I know he hates it, but I really want to thank President Ilves again. I already went on and on about him and inspiring our thought process for Mare Nostrum, but you wouldn't know, but he really is intimately involved in the planning and the conceptualization of this conference. I mean, a head of state who's not only driving this whole country's sense of nationhood, but he cares so much, cares about our institute and cares about all of you here, all of us, and the need for all these ideas to get into the public domain, that he's personally involved with his staff. So thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Ministry of Defense, for funding us in general here, everything we do. Thanks to the Prime Minister's staff as well, and the ministers who were with us, especially Carl Bildt. Thank you very much. Let's enjoy lunch and travel safely. Thank you.